All right. Hey, I have decided to read from our novel. I believe we're on chapter 15. Of course, I'm never prepared. If I was a proper YouTuber, I'd have the book open right to the chapter. Here it is. Okay. It had been too long since Maya had walked out in the city. No, that's what we read. That's what we read last time. So we're on chapter 16. 16. There it is. Okay. In her mind, Madrone often carried on conversations with Maya or Bird. She had been in the hill camp for over a week. Its discomforts had become familiar. You can get used to anything, she imagined herself explaining, as she stirred honey into acorn meal to make a meager breakfast, no different from her meager supper the night before. You can get used to hunger and thirst. The trick is not to think about it, or not to admit you were thinking about it. Goddess knows there's no lack of distractions. Her days were full of tasks, tending to the sick and aiding the Melissa with the wounded, shelling the narrow acorns of the live oaks and the fat corns from the valley oaks, grinding meal, leaching its bitter tannic acid in such running water as they could find. She felt herself getting tougher, drier, more self-enclosed, like a leathery-leafed bush of the chaparral, which turns only the edges of its leaves towards the sun. Night after night she tried to dream back to Lily and the council, but all she dreamed of was water, rain pouring down on the roof of Black Dragon House, the sound of the little stream outside their front door, the roaring of a river in the gorge high up in the Sierras, bowls of water left on altars as offerings, hot water pouring over her body in the shower. There is one thing I can't get used to, Maya, she imagined herself saying. I can't adjust to the meager diet. I can even put up with the thirst, chewing on a raw acorn to let its astringent taste distract my mouth from its need for water. But I cannot get used to the dirt, the smell of my own unwashed body, the greasy strings of my hair, and what's worse, the condition of my patients, which hardly bears thinking about. When her moon blood came, Rocky showed her the pile of soft mosses she had gathered to use as pads, but there were still smears on her legs and hands, and everything began to smell and taste of iron. I've got to have a bath, she said finally to Rocky one morning. I don't care if I have to hike back down to the coast or I have to commandeer a water truck single-handed. I just can't live like this. Rocky laughed. Maybe somebody can take you to the waterfall. It's a 2-3 hour hike to get there, so it doesn't often seem worth it to me. But if you want to go, I'll ask Highjohn to take you. He needs to exercise, build his strength back up before he goes off on a raid again. That sounds like a long way, Madrone said doubtfully. Maybe I shouldn't. I guess they can all survive without you for an afternoon. I'll pack you some acorns. Highjohn came for her a little while later. He had a sack of acorns slung across his back and a rifle over his shoulder. Ready? He asked. Madrone nodded. The rifle made her nervous. Arms were not generally in evidence around camp. She hadn't seen any since her arrival. Do we really need that? She asked. I wouldn't bother to carry it if we didn't need it. We'll be going outside the area our scouts keep guard on. We could run into patrols, anything. And if we did, you'd shoot them? If they saw us and we couldn't get away from them, I might have to. Does that bother you? Of course it bothers me. It makes me sick to think about it. Doesn't it bother you? I try to avoid it, John said, but this is a war, Madrone, and that's what war is about, killing or dying. I know about war, Madrone snapped. I was born in Guadalupe, down in Central America. My mother was killed by a death squad during the uprising. I saw people shot. I know it happens, but that doesn't mean I have to accept it or like it. You don't have to like it, John said, but you do have to accept it, unless you know of an alternative up in your miracle city. Madrone was silent. What was happening in the city? She wondered. Were they carrying offerings of spring flowers down to the bay and chanting ancient stories of Persephone's return? What would they do when war came to them? No, John asked. We're not a miracle, Madrone told him. We just learned how to live in peace with each other. That's not so hard to do. But what will happen when war comes to us, I don't know. In the meantime, John said, let's go have our bath. Any trouble, lie flat, let me handle it. John led Madrone to a path almost invisible in the thick brush. They followed a stream that at first was nothing but a suggestion of damp, a trickle of mud, a string of small puddles covered with green slime of algae. Farther up they came upon a slightly deeper pool, made the depth of a finger joint, still scummy and stagnant. As they hiked on, they saw the almost imperceptible beginnings of movement in the water, a mere suggestion of ripples. They followed the stream bed past rock pools and hollows until the slow trickle became a flow. At last they heard the sweet and musical sound, note upon note, of falling water. They scrambled over a ledge of rock and climbed on. Madrone felt she could drink through her ears. She was so thirsty for even the sound of water. At last they reached the pool, knee-deep at most, as the fall's only a thin stream sliding down a sheer rock. At home, Madrone thought, she wouldn't have called this a puddle, let alone a waterfall. But she wasn't complaining. It was enough of a fall to have a voice, and to have hollowed out a rounded space in the sandstone cliff where reflections danced. They knelt and drank. The water tasted slightly of algae, but Madrone didn't care. Dios, it was good, so good to drink her fill. All that she wanted. She dipped her hands in the water and splashed it over her face, letting the drops fall back down, laughing. When they finished drinking, they filled their water containers. I'll wander off if you like, and let you bathe in peace, John said. You don't really have to, Madrone said. I mean, where I come from, we're not shy about nakedness. You sure? She nodded and slipped out of her shirt and pants. His eyes followed her, and she stepped into the pool, squatted, and splashed herself. Maybe this isn't wise, she thought suddenly. It's too suggestive. The pool was so small they couldn't both fit in without rubbing against each other. John turned away, perching on a rock and turning his back to the pool and looking out over the canyon they hiked through. Madrone found herself mildly disappointed. You're incorrigible, she told herself, just because you haven't had any sex for a while. Shame on you. He's not even really what you'd call attractive, except that clearly, in these parts, he's the alpha male. She rubbed sand over her skin to wear away any ingrained dirt, scrubbing hard as if to clean away her thoughts. Water was better than a lover, anyway, she thought. It reached more of her intimate places, penetrated her pores more thoroughly, left her clean. She scrubbed her scalp with sand and rinsed her hair, then climbed up on a rock to dry. Your turn, she said to High John. I'm afraid it's a bit muddy now, though. I don't mind. He smiled at her. Yes, he had a really nice smile, she thought. Keep watch down the canyon, will you? If you see anything suspicious, give a yell. He placed the rifle on the ground beside the pool, carefully within his reach. Dutifully, she turned and looked down canyon, which will keep my eyes from staring where they ought not to go, she told herself, aware of High John's undressing behind her. The bright green of new oak leaves, the blue-green of white sage, the yellow-green of budding tops of white-barked sycamore made moving patterns in the gray chaparral. Wild lilacs bloomed in white-blue clusters of tiny star-shaped flowers that sweated perfume, sending the bees into frenzied bouts of work. Orange butterflies darted over black-eyed Susans that bloomed beside vines of the wild white morning glory and other flowers she couldn't name, silver, purple, blue. I hope you meant what you said about nakedness, High John said, suddenly appearing behind her on the rock, because I've just washed our clothes. She helped him spread them out to dry. They sat sunning themselves, the rifle laying at High John's side. A foot of space separated them, and the air between them seemed to press against her bare flesh. Madrone's hair was nearly dry. She sat up and began twisting it into braids. Why don't you leave it loose? High John asked. It looks pretty that way. It collects things if I don't braid it, wraps its little tendrils around leaves and twigs, and tries to hang me from branches. Really, I should cut it, but I can't bring myself to yet. Sandy always liked it long. Who's Sandy? My compañero, partner, lover. He was. He died last summer. I'm sorry. They sat in silence that eventually began to feel awkward. Have you always lived like this? Madrone asked High John. How did you come to the hills? You wouldn't think it to look at me, High John said, but my father and mother were both actors in the widescreens. Real good-looking people. When the Stewards took over, they let the millennialists clean up the industry. They wanted everybody to sign the millennialist creed. My dad wouldn't do it. Neither would my mother. A lot of folks in the industry resisted and wouldn't sign. One day they rounded them all up, sent the women to the pens. That was the last I saw of my mom. My dad had been out on location with a crew, wrapping up the last shoot he'd been hired for before the crackdown. Some of the guys got word of what was happening, hid out in the desert and armed themselves. My dad snuck into town and grabbed me out of the school where they'd stuck me, and we joined them. I was 9 years old. We began raiding the pens, but we never did find my mother. So he's my age exactly, Madrone thought. To look at him, he could be 40. What are the pens exactly? Some of them are like whorehouses where they service the soldiers. Some are like farms where they breed soldiers and runners and other things. Oh, it seemed inadequate, but she could think of nothing else to say. There are things too horrible to comprehend, like the African slave trade or the Nazi death camps. They left her numb in response, but they were real and happening now. They could even happen to her. I'm so sorry about your mother, she said, her words sounding flat and stupid. That was a long time ago. I'm sure she's dead now. Women don't survive in the pens for 20 years. He's gone numb, too. How else do you bear the unbearable memory, the image that burns the back of your eyes? Like me, he is a motherless child. So you see why I carry a rifle, High John went on. If it were a choice between killing a guy or letting them take you to the pens, which would you rather I do? The pens are real, and they could happen to me. It was a cold thought, not a new thought. I know what happened to Bird, to High John himself, but it seems so much closer here, so much more real. I can't answer that. Madrone turned to meet his eyes, but they were fixed on the trail that led back downstream below them. I understand why you carry a gun. It's just that I was always taught that the ends don't justify the means, and the means determine the ends you can reach. That peace can't grow out of violence. No, but violence can clear away some of the underbrush, John said. Make a little space and light. I'm not from here, Madrone said, touching his arm lightly and then drawing her hand back. I can't presume to tell you how to fight, but I believe there's got to be another sort of power somewhere, somehow, different from violence, and maybe in its own way stronger. If we can learn how to find it and wield it. Is that the type of power I'm meant to gather? Can I find it in those dry, harsh hills? Get down, John said suddenly, shoving her so hard that she rolled off the rock into the brush. In an instant he had the rifle and was lying prone, gazing into the scope. What's wrong? Madrone whispered. She fought to steady her own breath. Her pulse throbbed in her throat. Diosa, we're talking theory, and now it is happening. What if he kills someone to protect me? What if he doesn't? Goddess Maya, why did I come here? Someone's coming up the path, John whispered. Back off slowly behind the rock, so it covers you. I'll follow. She crawled backward and the stony ground hard on her knees. John slid gracefully down the rock, his eyes never leaving the path. Madrone could hear no footsteps, only the hum of bees in the bright sunlight. A bee circled her face, broke away to nose John. Oh, goddess, that's all we need to get stung right now, she thought. But John slowly lowered his gun. I think it's okay, he said. It's the sisters. Then the sound of bees filled the canyon. Thousands of them seemed to be buzzing and humming, darting out to taste the nectar of her sweat. Come out, Madrone, the Melissa called. The sisters have sent for you. Madrone slowly stood and came out from behind the rock next to John. The Melissa's eyes were dark hollows behind the living skin of moving bees that covered her face and body. She looked alien, no longer quite human. What do they want with me? Madrone asked. It's time you learned to be one of us. Maybe it was the rush of adrenaline still in her bloodstream, but Madrone's heart was still thumping, her breath still shallow and tight. What do I have to do? You must be initiated. Now is the time, while the wild lilac is still in bloom. What does that involve? For the next 9 days you will belong to us. 9 days? I don't know if I can be away for 9 days. She looked at John, half begging for an excuse, a way out. John only shrugged. When the bees call, we don't argue, he said. But people will die, Madrone said, if I'm not there to tend them and heal them. Others will live if you gather power, the Melissa said. Come. Madrone could not refuse. Quickly she put on her still damp clothes and followed the Melissa back down the canyon. The Melissa led her on a side trail over a ridge and down to another stream bed, this one nearly dry. They hiked up to a rocky outcropping where, long ago, a river had scored a small hole in a bank, a dome-shaped cave just large enough for one person to lie curled up inside. Outside the cave sat a group of women, each cloaked in bees, like the Melissa. Together they appeared less like human forms than vortexes of whirling energies, a dance of beating wings that fanned the air around them and threw the brown dust into the whirlwinds. They greeted Madrone with a bobbing gesture that set the bees humming even louder. The noise filled Madrone's head, canceling the thought and memory, leaving nothing but a kind of primal fear. What's going to happen? Madrone whispered. The Melissa did not answer. There is nothing to be afraid of, Madrone told herself. Where there's fear, there's power. Strangeness, it's just strangeness. Mammal fear of the insect world. Breathe it away. But they closed in around her, and for one long moment she fought stark panic. She was surrounded by bees, humming and buzzing so that she could no longer think or feel or fear. Hands pulled her shirt over her head, slid her pants down off her feet, unbraided her long hair. They poured honey over her body and rubbed it all through her hair. When the Melissa brought a shell to her lips, she had one last urge to resist, to hold on to herself unchanged. But the Melissa jerked her head back and poured the liquid down in her throat that she had to swallow or choke. She gulped it down, swallow after swallow, tasting fermented honey and something else, feeling her throat and belly catch fire, and the fire shoot through her and change her. Everything around her disappeared, and there was nothing left but sweet fire inside of her. And outside, the buzzing, fragrant air. Sweetness. She was immersed in sweetness. Her sense of smell was augmented. The scent of wild lilacs on the air now became the overriding quality of the universe. Each breath filled her with promise of food and love and abundant life. Sweetness carried her, launched her on wings. She was suspended in the scented air, following her nose to bury herself deep in the heart of blossoms. Her body felt the magnetic pull of the North Pole just as it felt the pull of gravity. Petals brushed her with their moist velvet touch, and she plunged into their depths, filling her nostrils with scent until her whole body quivered, extending her tongue to sip delicate nectar so that she was all sweetness inside and out. Some human part of her mind cried out, fighting to contain the aromas that moved through her and around her, to name them, to describe them, limit them. Sage, lilac, those were names she could hold to, and names kept her anchored to herself. Oak, madrone. Don't fight the change, she heard Melissa's voice coming to her, not in words, but in rasping vibration, a tone in the air, a scent. Let go, let go. She was falling, then she was flying. Lilac was not a name, but a realm of the air that called her into places where her whole body throbbed with delight. Sage was a universe, pungent, bracing. Hold on, her mind cried. Let go, the Melissa buzzed and hummed and murmured. Madrone's own fear was a stench she could hardly bear. The meat of her body stank of blood. Rise, the Melissa said. Madrone wanted to clutch her human form, but she no longer had hands to grip with, only wings that beat incessantly, gossamer propellers to carry her away from something lying dead below her that she did not want to remember. No, Mamma, not now. What are you doing here? You are long ago and far away, and I don't want to be pulled down to drown in the warm red milk of your body. The air was filled with a sound that might have been her own voice screaming. Let go, the Melissa whispered. Let yourself rise. Follow the sweetness. Rise, murmured the voices of the sisters. Whether human or bee, Madrone could no longer tell. Rise and fly. Fly away. Yes, and why not? Why not, when it was so easy and her wings were pulling her into the air, pulling her apart the more she tried to hold on. But if she just let go, they would lift her. She could let them lift her away from all the horrors locked in her own human memory and dissolve, transform, take wing. Madrone was lying in the cave with no awareness of how she'd gotten there. It was warm and felt safe, like a womb, like a hive. She was covered in honey, and there were bees with her constantly, a blanket of them, feeding from her body. The tickling of their thread feet, the almost imperceptible rasp of their tongues brought every nerve alive in her body. Then something stung, call it pain. In the state, the word has no meaning. No. Then something stung her in the center of her forehead. It pulsed and throbbed. She couldn't even call it pain. In this state, the word had no meaning. She was moving in the safe, dark hive where body brushed against scented body, learning from movement and smell what the hive knew, the paths through the air to the nectar flow, the health of the brood, the golden warmth of the sun, and under it all the queen's smell, something that crept into her and soothed her with a deep sense of rightness, the way the milky smell of the breast soothes a baby. I remember this, she would have cried out if she had words. Oh, mamma, I have missed you so. But before she could sink into the brood smell, her bee body swelled and elongated. She was the queen, nurtured on royal jelly, emerging with strong wings out of womb dark hive to soar for the first and only time up into the light, up, up, her strong wings beating the sweet air, chased by a cloud of drones. Only the strongest could catch her, could plunge himself into her in one ecstatic mid-air moment and fill her with the brood to come. She longed for that moment. She ached for it. But before it came, she shifted again. So the queen and drone and worker were only flashing, sparkling, momentary configurations of the morphic kaleidoscope, each individual an impermanent convergence of golden liquid and lacy wing, dissolving and forming, dying and being born. Within her own body flowed rivers of scent and taste, and suddenly she knew them in a way even she, a healer, never had before. Knew the scents her sweat could produce and what each signified and how they could be messages and conversations and offerings. The bees rasped at her sweat, probing and probing tongues. Was it human hands or gauze wings that stroked her until honey dripped from her breasts and streams of nectar poured between her thighs? Something was tasting her, tasting what she offered, and all was sweet. The Melissa touched the center of Madrone's forehead, where the stung place still throbbed. With a tiny knife she opened a flower-like wound. A drop of blood appeared, and the bees swarmed, curious to taste. We share nectar with the sisters, the Melissa said. Then she packed the wound with propolis. Madrone would have a small blossom-like scar. The sweat that beaded on the scar would be sweet, her own nectar, to feed the sisters. Slowly Madrone became aware that she was no longer in the cave. Time had passed. She had no idea how long she'd been lying in the shade of an arching pale sycamore. Bees hummed lazily around her. Their sound was now like music to hear, operas and symphonies and oratorios, and at the same time like a crowd of gossiping friends telling her everything she needed to know. A piece of acorn bread lay under her hand. As she ate it, she felt her mind beginning to return. She felt a sense of vertigo, almost a double vision. She could see through multifaceted insect eyes more easily, but she could look at things straight on in her old human way. The humming grew louder, and her vision shifted as the energy changed again. The Melissa was sitting beside her. "How do you feel?" the Melissa asked. Madrone was surprised to hear the question in words. They seemed awkward, clumsy, unnecessary, when a molecule of scent could convey the same thing. She gave her answer as she had learned to do, in a bead of sweat on her eye spot that carried in its chemistry the taste of wonder and confusion. No answer in words, the Melissa said. It's time for you to take back your words. You will need them. Oh, no answer in words, the Melissa said. It's time for you to take back your words. You will need them. Madrone closed her eyes. She knew there was an answer to the question, but words seemed primitive and inadequate compared to the delicate subtleties of taste and smell. You must speak, the Melissa said. Why? Because you must return to the human world and be the healer needed there. The hive is not for you. The buried nugget of her human self stirred and shifted. I know that, Madrone thought. It smells right. But the hive is sweetness and rest and peace, and soft bodies endlessly brushing and touching and pleasuring one another. Remembering, she let the odor of her body plead to stay. You would not want it forever. You would resist and beg for your name back. And that also smelled right. Madrone sighed and opened her eyes. How do you feel? The Melissa asked again. All right, Madrone managed to say, and laughed at the imprecision of words. A little disoriented. It will pass as you eat more. Rest today and practice your new powers, and tomorrow perhaps we will take you back to camp. How? What? You must anchor the bee vision so you can call it back or shut it off at your will. Here, touch your forehead on the bee spot, and remember your old self and call her back. Say your human name. Madrone. She shook her head slightly as her vision cleared and the world resolved itself back into separate objects. And now touch the spot again. Remember the hive smell and let the bee sense return. Again, vision shifted, letting scent replace sight and knowing replace thinking. Now call yourself back again. Madrone hesitated, the words not making sense, until the Melissa picked up Madrone's hand and placed it on her forehead again. Your name, she reminded her. Madrone. Practice that change until you can remember it when you're in your bee mind and do it all at will. Can you do that? Yes, I've been doing stuff like this since I was a baby. I just need to work at it a bit, and I want to come back. That is always the challenge. The hive is very sweet, but you stay in the bee mind and you walk and talk and interact with other humans as little as possible. But I have many, many years behind me of this shape shifting, and the other Melissas too. You are very new, and we have given you only the small initiation. If that was the small one, God has saved me from the big one. It may come to you in time, but I think that the dance is not yours. The big initiation takes everything, and when you emerge, you are yourself no longer, but part of us, as every bee is a part of the hive. But we have taken nothing from you, not your name, not your power. All will be as it was before. You are not of the hive as we are, but you will be able to draw upon the sisters for help and nourishment and protection. How? How do I do that? Through your bee spot. Come into your bee mind now, and I will teach you how to call the sisters when you need them. Madrone touched the spot and let breath and memory take her back to the sweetness. The bees cloaking the Melissa's face shifted like the parting of a veil, and from the blossom-like scar in the center of her forehead a crystal bead of sweat emerged. Madrone leaned forward and touched the tip of her tongue to the drop. Her whole body came alive with longing. She was called. She She had to come. She wanted to come. The taste changed. She sensed danger. She was filled with rage. It shook her body, and she was ready to rip herself apart and die in defense of the source of sweetness. And then the taste changed again, and she knew hunger and emptiness demanding to be filled. And then again it changed, and she knew she was meant to carry a complex scent back to the hive and dance. Then her hand was being slapped against her own forehead again, and once more, and she returned to her human self. Today we will work on just these four things: the call to the bees, the call for protection, the call for food, and the message call. If you can learn these four, you will do well. And the healing that you do with the bees, can I learn that? The Melissa shook her head. That comes with the big initiation. And even then it's tricky and dangerous. It goes against the nature of the little sisters, which is to kill the sick and wounded for the sake of the whole, not to cherish the individual parts. And what you've taught me, does that go against their nature? What I have taught you works with their nature. It is how they communicate. Even so, never make the mistake of thinking you control them. They are wild. They will aid you if they wish to, but they will not always understand you. And with all you have learned in these days, you still only barely begin to understand them. How did you learn all this? Who taught you? The old woman taught me. She taught us all. And who was the old woman? In the time of the great sickness and the hunger, when the stewards came to power, she fled to these canyons to live quietly and secretly, for she was a witch. She grew a garden and kept bees, and when her friends and family died in the epidemic, and she was lonely, she spoke to the bees and grew more and more like them, until she shared some of their secrets and learned to brew the nectar that opens the bee mind. She trained us all. Is she still alive? Can I meet her? The Melissa was silent. Madrone lay back, suddenly exhausted. Through the dappled shade, spots of sunlight shone red behind her lids. Rest a bit, the Melissa said. I will bring more bread, and then we will practice again. She dozed. In her dream she saw Lily's face. The old woman cupped her hands and lifted them to the center of her brow, where there was a waterfall. She held them out to Madrone, offering a drink. Madrone dipped her face into the cool water, lapped with her tongue like an animal. She tasted urgency and fear.